August 1944. German generals are laughing. Patton's tanks are stranded out of fuel, and Berlin seems untouchable. But behind the lines, a convoy of 6,000 trucks roars through danger, driven by soldiers, many of whom face discrimination at home. Their mission? Keep the Allies moving or watch the war slip away. Let's set the stage. June 6, 1944, D-Day. Allied forces storm the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in history. It's brutal, it's bloody, but they break through. By August, General George S. Patton's Third Army is tearing through France like a knife through butter. Towns are liberated, the Germans are retreating. Victory feels close enough to taste. But then, everything grinds to a halt. Here's the problem nobody saw coming. Patton's army is moving too fast. His tanks are covering 50, sometimes 70 miles a day. They're consuming 400,000 gallons of fuel every single day. That's enough to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And it's not just fuel. We're talking ammunition, food, medical supplies, spare parts. Every tank, every truck, every soldier needs constant resupply. The original plan was to use French ports to ship supplies inland. But there's a massive issue. Most of the ports are destroyed or still held by German forces. The main supply depot? It's back at the Normandy beaches, over 400 miles away from the front lines. That's like trying to fight a war in New York while your supplies are stuck in North Carolina. Did you know? A single Sherman tank only got about 60 miles per 150 gallons of fuel. Now, multiply that by thousands of vehicles. The math is staggering. The Allied commanders are facing a nightmare scenario. Patton's army is within striking distance of Germany itself, but without fuel and ammunition, those tanks are just expensive paperweights. The German generals are receiving intelligence reports. They're reading about Allied supply problems, and they're smiling. They think the American advance is finished. Some are even joking about how the Americans will have to walk back to Paris. They have no idea what's coming. The Supreme Allied Command makes a desperate decision. They need to move 12,000 tons of supplies every single day from the beaches to the front lines. Traditional supply methods won't cut it. They need something radical, something that's never been attempted in military history. August 25th, 1944. The operation launches with a name that sounds almost casual, the Red Ball Express. The name comes from railroad terminology, where Red Ball meant high-priority freight that had absolute right-of-way. But there's nothing casual about what they're attempting. Picture this. They designate two highways across France exclusively for military supply trucks, one lane going toward the front, one coming back. No civilian traffic allowed, no military traffic unless you're part of the convoy. These roads are marked with red balls painted on signs every few miles. If you see that red ball, you know you're on sacred ground. The operation requires 6,000 trucks running non-stop 24 hours a day. Each truck is loaded with 5 tons of supplies. The drivers work in shifts, sometimes going 36 hours straight. There are no days off, no breaks. The rule is simple. If your truck can move, you drive. Now, here's the part of history that often gets whitewashed or ignored. Roughly 75% of the Red Ball Express drivers were black soldiers. These men were serving a country that still had segregated military units where they faced discrimination and were often relegated to support roles rather than combat positions. Many came from the 666th Quartermaster Truck Company and similar units. Back home, some couldn't drink from the same water fountains as white Americans. But here, on these French highways, they were the difference between victory and defeat. Did you know? The Red Ball Express operated on a route so prioritized that even generals had to wait if a convoy was passing through. The supplies came first, always. The trucks themselves were primarily GMC CCKW 2.5-ton cargo trucks, nicknamed Jimmies, or Deuce and a Half. These weren't luxury vehicles. They were loud, uncomfortable, and had minimal protection. No armor plating, no weapon mounts, just canvas covers and prayer. The drivers were sitting ducks if German fighters spotted them. But here's where it gets interesting. The operation was supposed to be temporary, maybe 3 weeks until the ports were captured and operational. Instead, it ran for 83 days, nearly 3 months of non-stop driving through enemy territory, terrible weather, and impossible conditions. The logistics were insane. Every truck was numbered. Every driver had a manifest. They organized convoys in groups of 5 trucks, spaced 60 yards apart to minimize damage from air attacks. At night, they drove with blackout lights, tiny slits that barely showed the road. Imagine driving a fully loaded 5-ton truck at 25 miles per hour in near-total darkness on bombed-out roads, knowing a single mistake could kill you and destroy critical supplies. The soldiers developed their own culture. They painted names on their trucks: Hitler's hearse, Berlin or bust, the Screaming Eagle. They sang songs to stay awake. They pushed through exhaustion that would break most people. Sleep deprivation was so severe that drivers would sometimes hallucinate on the road. Let me tell you what a typical run looked like, because Hollywood couldn't write something this intense. You start at the depot near St. Lo on the Normandy coast. It's 4 a.m. You've had maybe 2 hours of sleep. Your truck is being loaded with jerry cans full of gasoline, the most dangerous cargo because one bullet or spark turns you into a fireball. 5 tons of it stacked in the back of your truck. The convoy forms up, 5 trucks, including yours. A sergeant gives the signal, and you're rolling. The first 100 miles aren't too bad. It's controlled territory. But you're still watching the sky because the Luftwaffe occasionally sends fighters on strafing runs. They love targeting fuel convoys. Around mile 150, the roads deteriorate. These aren't modern highways. They're French country roads that were never designed for this kind of traffic. Add in the damage from weeks of fighting, bomb craters hastily filled, bridges that creak under the weight, and you're white-knuckling the steering wheel for hours. Then there's the dust. In dry weather, each truck kicks up clouds of dirt so thick you can barely see the vehicle ahead. In rain, it turns to mud that sucks at your tires and makes every mile feel like 10. Trucks break down constantly. Tires blow out from the overloading in rough roads. Engines overheat. Transmissions fail. Did you know? The Red Ball Express consumed so many tires that it caused a rubber shortage back in the United States. They were going through tens of thousands of tires per month. Here's a real account from Private William Smith of the 666th Quartermaster Company. We drove in the rain, in the mud, in the dark. Guys would fall asleep at the wheel and drive off the road. We'd pull them out, get the truck back on track, and keep moving. If you stopped for anything other than mechanical failure or enemy action, you could face court-martial. The pressure was incredible. The drivers faced constant danger, and not just from the Germans. Friendly fire was a legitimate risk. Jumpy Allied troops sometimes shot at convoys before recognizing them. There were accidents constantly, trucks colliding in the darkness, vehicles rolling over on damaged roads. Some convoys came under artillery fire when they got too close to the fluid front lines. And the exhaustion, that was its own enemy. Drivers would go 3, 4, sometimes 5 days with only brief naps. Medical officers reported cases of men falling asleep while their trucks were still moving, their bodies on autopilot. Some drivers would slap themselves, bite their tongues, or have their co-driver punch them just to stay awake. While the Red Ball Express was fighting its own war on the highways, something fascinating and almost unbelievable was happening inside German high command. They were in the middle of one of the biggest intelligence failures of World War II. German reconnaissance planes occasionally spotted the convoys. Their reports went up the chain of command. But here's the twist. The generals thought they were looking at routine supply runs. They had no idea what they were really seeing. They didn't realize the Allies had turned 2 highways into a non-stop artery of war, a living pipeline pumping fuel, ammunition, and food straight to the front lines. The German system couldn't have been more different. They relied on rail, and the Allied bombers were tearing those railways apart daily. Their truck logistics were scattered, inconsistent, and hopelessly inefficient. The idea of running thousands of trucks 24/7 for months on end just didn't exist in their doctrine. It wasn't even in their imagination. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, one of Germany's most respected commanders, later admitted under Allied interrogation that they had seriously underestimated American logistical capabilities. That's military code for we had no idea what hit us. Here's the cruel irony. The Germans could have destroyed the Red Ball Express. One panzer division breaking through and cutting those supply lines could have stranded Patton's entire army. But they never did, because they couldn't. They were retreating, their divisions shattered, their fuel tanks dry. The once feared Wehrmacht was bleeding out, and the Red Ball kept the pressure on. Meanwhile, Patton was on fire. His tanks were refueled, his ammo dumps restocked, and his orders were simple: keep moving. By September 1944, the Third Army had liberated hundreds of French towns and was closing in on the German border. But beneath the glory ran another story, one about race, dignity, and recognition. Black soldiers driving through France found themselves treated better by French civilians than by some of their own officers. Locals invited them to dinners, dances, and celebrations. For many, it was the first time in their lives they were seen as equals, as heroes, not just soldiers. That didn't sit well with everyone. Some white officers resented the respect those men received. But on the road, none of that mattered. When you're hauling 5 tons of gasoline through enemy territory, the color of the man in the next truck doesn't matter. Out there, survival was colorblind, and courage came in every shade. By mid-September 1944, the Red Ball Express is running on fumes, literally and figuratively. The operation has been going for almost a month straight. Trucks are breaking down faster than they can be repaired. Drivers are reaching physical limits that medical science says shouldn't be possible. The numbers are staggering. In the first month alone, the Red Ball Express delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies. That's roughly 89 million pounds of material. To put that in perspective, it's like moving the weight of the Statue of Liberty more than 75 times, every single day. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. In late September, Allied forces finally capture the port of Antwerp in Belgium. This should be the moment the Red Ball Express can stand down. The port can handle the massive ships carrying supplies from America and Britain. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The Germans still control the Scheldt estuary, the waterway leading to Antwerp. Ships can't get in. The port is useless. The Red Ball Express has to keep running. More weeks, more miles, more exhaustion. Imagine being told you just need to hold on 3 more weeks and then 3 more and then 3 more. That's what these drivers faced. The psychological toll was enormous. Some soldiers had nervous breakdowns. Others developed conditions we'd now recognize as PTSD. From the constant stress, the sleep deprivation, the accidents they witnessed. But here's what's incredible. They didn't quit. Unit commanders reported that morale remained surprisingly high. Why? Because the drivers could see the impact of their work. Every time they delivered supplies to the front, they'd see American tanks rolling toward Germany. They'd see liberated towns. They knew they were winning the war. Did you know? The Red Ball Express operated so efficiently that it actually delivered more supplies per ton-mile than any peacetime trucking operation in American history up to that point. They were setting records that wouldn't be broken until the modern era of logistics. There's a story from this period that perfectly captures the spirit of the operation. A convoy was hit by a German air raid near Chartres. 3 trucks were destroyed, 2 drivers killed, several wounded. The surviving trucks, still loaded with supplies, regrouped and completed the delivery. The next day, replacement drivers took those same vehicles back for another load. No speeches, no medal ceremony, just back to work. Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee, who commanded the supply services, later wrote, "The Red Ball Express was not just a logistical operation. It was a triumph of human will over impossible circumstances. These men drove themselves to exhaustion and beyond because they understood that every mile mattered." By October, the situation reached a critical peak. The Red Ball Express was operating 132 truck companies simultaneously. Over 23,000 soldiers were directly involved. The operation had expanded far beyond its original scope. It was no longer just supporting Patton, it was supplying the entire Allied advance across France. November 28, 1944. After 83 days of continuous operation, the Red Ball Express made its final run. The port of Antwerp was finally operational. The Seine River crossings were secure. A more traditional supply network could finally take over. The final statistics are almost impossible to comprehend. The Red Ball Express delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies across more than 300 million miles of driving. If you lined up all those miles, you could drive to the moon and back more than 600 times, all accomplished in less than 3 months. But those numbers hide the human cost. The operation lost hundreds of soldiers. The exact figure is uncertain because records were incomplete. Some died in accidents, others were killed in enemy attacks, many more were permanently injured. Countless others suffered long-term health effects from sleep deprivation, stress, and relentless exhaustion. The impact on the war effort was undeniable. Military historians largely agree that without the Red Ball Express, Patton's advance would have stalled in August 1944. The war in Europe could have dragged on for months longer. Thousands more Allied and civilian lives might have been lost. Some analysts even suggest that atomic bombs might have been deployed against Germany if the war hadn't ended when it did. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, later stated, "The success of the Red Ball Express was one of the most impressive logistical achievements of the war. Without it, our advance across France would have been impossible." Even General George S. Patton, known for being stingy with praise, wrote in his diary, "My hat is off to the supply troops. They've accomplished what the textbooks said couldn't be done." But here's the bitter truth. When the war ended and the soldiers came home, those black drivers who had risked everything for victory returned to a segregated America. Many couldn't vote in their home states. They faced discrimination in jobs, housing, and education. The GI Bill, designed to reward veterans, was often denied to black soldiers through bureaucracy and outright racism. Did you know? It took until 1988 for the U.S. military to officially recognize the contributions of black soldiers in World War II with proper documentation and honors. Decades of heroes went unacknowledged. Some of those Red Ball Express veterans became civil rights activists. They'd seen what America could be, what they had fought for, and they refused to accept less at home. Many became leaders in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. They had defeated fascism abroad. Now they were determined to defeat discrimination at home. The Red Ball Express also revolutionized military logistics. It proved that with organization and willpower, massive amounts of material could be moved by road over long distances. That doctrine shaped American strategy through Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Modern military supply chains still operate on principles born during those 83 days in France. Today, parts of the original Red Ball Express routes are marked with commemorative plaques. In France, they're treated as historic monuments. Across American bases, buildings and roads bear the name Red Ball Express, a permanent tribute to an operation that kept the engine of victory running. So what can we learn from the Red Ball Express over 80 years later? Quite a lot, actually. First, there's the lesson of what people can accomplish when the mission is clear and the stakes are understood. These drivers knew that every mile mattered. They weren't just hauling cargo, they were winning a war. When individual effort connects to a larger purpose, extraordinary things become possible. Second, the Red Ball Express remains a masterclass in logistics and organization. This operation coordinated thousands of moving parts using 1940s technology. No computers, no GPS, no instant communication. Just maps, schedules, radios, and discipline. It proved that success isn't always about having the best technology. Sometimes it's about maximizing what you have and refusing to let limitations define you. Third, there's an uncomfortable truth about recognition and valor. For decades, the Red Ball Express was barely mentioned in history books or reduced to a footnote. Why? Because it didn't fit the cinematic narrative of heroic combat. Supply trucks aren't as glamorous as fighter planes or tank battles. And because so many of those heroes were black soldiers, their contributions were quietly minimized or erased. But the real heroes are often the ones you never see, the ones doing the unglamorous, exhausting, critical work that makes everything else possible. That's true in war, and it's true in life. The IT technician keeping systems running, the janitor keeping facilities clean, the teacher preparing lessons at midnight. Success rarely belongs to one brilliant individual. It's built on countless unseen hands doing essential work. Did you know? Several Hollywood films have been proposed about the Red Ball Express over the years, but most never made it past pre-production. The one film that did, released in 1952, downplayed the role of black soldiers due to the racial attitudes of the time. Only in recent years has the true story begun to be told accurately. The operation also demonstrates the power of adaptability. When the Allied command faced a logistics crisis, they didn't freeze. They invented. They broke doctrine, took risks, and built something the world had never seen before. The Red Ball Express wasn't in any manual. It was born from necessity, improvisation, and grit. And finally, there's a sense of poetic justice in how it all turned out. German generals mocked the Americans. They believed the advance had stalled, that the fuel and supplies would run dry. What they underestimated wasn't just American industrial power. It was American determination, creativity, and the will to overcome. More specifically, they underestimated the courage of thousands of black soldiers who fought not only against fascism abroad, but for equality and recognition at home. The incredible, often forgotten story of the Red Ball Express. If this story opened your eyes to how determination and logistics won battles most people never think about, check out the video on the screen. The Red Ball Express may have stopped rolling, but its legacy never will.